How does a journalist transform into an accused spy in the heart of West Africa? President Ibrahim Traoré shocked the world when he publicly confronted Julian Morell with evidence of espionage. But the real story goes much deeper than what first appeared in those viral clips. In the next 12 minutes, I'll break down exactly what evidence Traoré presented, how Morell responded, and why this incident has thousands of Africans celebrating in the streets while painting "We see you now" across walls. The confrontation is just the tip of a geopolitical iceberg that's been building since Burkina Faso's 2022 coup. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. What if the journalist interviewing you was actually gathering intelligence for a foreign power? That's exactly what President Traoré claimed when he confronted Julian Morell, a man who arrived in Burkina Faso with a press badge and a story about wanting to understand the country's security challenges. Morell spoke fluent French and even expressed admiration for the young president, saying, "It's rare to see young African leaders who stand up to the West." He seemed like just another foreign correspondent looking for his next article. Morell landed at Ouagadougou International Airport with a tourist visa and credentials identifying him as a freelance journalist. He told everyone he wanted to share local voices with the world and claimed to be sympathetic to the Burkinabè cause. His story seemed legitimate at first. A journalist interested in a country that had recently experienced the significant political changes. He moved freely throughout the capital, conducted interviews and attended press events just like any other reporter. But during his 23-day stay in the country, Morell's movements started raising red flags. He visited military camps without proper authorization and was spotted walking near rail lines multiple times. Local sources reported he asked unusual questions about transport routes and mine shipments, topics that went beyond standard reporting. Even more suspiciously, he spent time near a restricted radio tower, an area off-limits to journalists and tourists alike. All this while producing no published articles that anyone could find. The Burkinabè intelligence services didn't miss these warning signs. They began tracking Morell's activities around the clock and discovered something troubling. Instead of filing stories to news outlets, Morell was sending encrypted emails at 2 a.m. to servers registered in Abidjan, the capital of neighboring Côte d'Ivoire. The timing and encryption alone raised suspicions, but the destination of these communications suggested a coordinated operation rather than journalistic work. Intelligence officers logged his emails, texts, and voice messages, finding information patterns inconsistent with normal reporting. Morell showed unusual interest in mapping military storage depots and resource-rich areas throughout the country. His movements created a pattern that looked more like surveillance than journalism. He visited 9 military-adjacent zones in just over 3 weeks, far more than needed for any legitimate news story about the country. President Traoré received all this evidence and decided on a bold strategy. Rather than quietly arresting Morell or simply expelling him from the country, he organized a press conference where he invited the supposed journalist to answer questions. The setup was carefully planned. Local media and selected international press were present to witness what would happen next. Morell arrived thinking he would be interviewing the president, completely unaware he was walking into his own exposure. The confrontation began with Traoré asking seemingly innocent questions. "You've been in our country for 23 days, correct?" When Morell confirmed, Traoré continued, "You have visited 9 military-adjacent zones." The president then presented physical evidence that stunned everyone in the room. He showed photos of Morell near sensitive military facilities, screenshots of encrypted emails, and most damning of all, a laptop containing maps of sensitive zones throughout Burkina Faso. The evidence culminated with a detailed map of the country containing pins marking oil routes, mine locations, and 2 unmarked military storage depots. This map was found in a folder labeled "For Review," alongside the name of a French military contractor. Most notably, these military storage locations weren't public knowledge. Their locations would only be known to someone with access to classified information or someone who had conducted extensive surveillance. Morell's cover collapsed completely when Traoré revealed recordings of him near strategic locations disguised as interviews with guards. The supposed journalist couldn't provide coherent explanations for why he needed detailed information about military installations or why he was sending encrypted messages in the middle of the night. His activities went far beyond what any journalist would need for reporting. The systematic mapping of strategic resources and military positions pointed clearly to intelligence gathering. The most telling moment came when Morell was confronted with evidence of his late-night communications. He stammered through an explanation about time zone differences that made no sense given that he was sending messages to a neighboring country in the same time zone. The suspicious movement patterns, encrypted communications to foreign servers, and detailed mapping of strategic locations couldn't be explained away as normal journalistic activities. The confrontation ended with Traoré's powerful statement to Morell, "You came for stories. Now you are the story." With those words, the tables turned completely. The man who came to gather information became the subject of international attention himself. In one strategic move, Traoré not only exposed what he claimed was a spy operation, but sent a clear message to foreign powers. Burkina Faso was paying attention and would no longer allow covert operations to continue unchallenged on its soil. Why would thousands of Burkinabè citizens celebrate the public humiliation of a French national? The answer lies in decades of complicated history between Burkina Faso and its former colonial power. The streets of Ouagadougou filled with people waving Burkinabè flags and singing victory songs after President Traoré confronted Morell. This wasn't just about one suspected spy. It was the latest chapter in a relationship that has soured dramatically in recent years. France maintained significant influence in Burkina Faso since the country gained independence in 1960. The relationship was built on a foundation of military cooperation, economic ties, and cultural influence that gave France continued access to natural resources and strategic positioning in West Africa. French troops operated on Burkinabè soil, French companies extracted gold and other minerals, and French remained the official language of government and education. This presence was justified under the banner of providing security assistance and development aid. But beneath the surface of this official partnership, anti-French sentiment grew steadily throughout the 2010s. Many Burkinabè viewed the relationship as fundamentally unbalanced, a continuation of colonial extraction dressed up as mutual cooperation. Local activists pointed to French mining operations that took resources while leaving minimal benefits for local communities. Others questioned why French military presence failed to stop the spread of terrorist groups across the northern regions. The phrase France-Afrique became shorthand for what many saw as France's continued neocolonial control over its former territories. The September 2022 coup that brought Ibrahim Traoré to power marked a decisive turning point. Unlike previous leaders who maintained cordial relations with Paris, Traoré ran on an explicitly anti-imperial platform. At just 34 years old, he represented a new generation of African leaders unwilling to accept the post-colonial arrangements of their predecessors. Traoré's speeches directly called out France for what he described as decades of exploitation disguised as partnership. His popularity soared when he questioned why a country rich in gold, manganese, and other resources remained one of the poorest in the world. Traoré wasted no time in acting on his rhetoric. Within months of taking power, he demanded the complete withdrawal of French troops and military equipment from Burkina Faso territory. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a direct order for French special forces to leave the country they had operated in since 2018. The approximately 400 French soldiers stationed in Burkina Faso packed up their equipment and departed, marking the end of military cooperation that had lasted generations. The government didn't stop at removing physical French presence. In January 2023, Burkina Faso formally denounced the 1961 Military Cooperation Agreement with France. This agreement had formed the foundation of defense partnership between the two nations since independence. Its cancellation represented a complete break with the security framework that had defined relations for over 6 decades. The message was clear: Burkina Faso would handle its own security concerns without French oversight. Media became the next battlefield. Throughout 2023, Burkina Faso suspended several French media outlets, including Le Monde, Radio France Internationale, France 24, and Jeune Afrique. The government accused these organizations of biased reporting and spreading misinformation about the country. With French journalists largely unable to work in the country, the government gained greater control over information flowing in and out of Burkina Faso. This media restriction created an information vacuum that would later be filled by Russian outlets. The situation escalated further in December 2023 with the arrest of 4 French officials in Ouagadougou on espionage charges. While French authorities claimed these individuals were technicians performing computer maintenance at the embassy, Burkinabè officials insisted they were intelligence agents. The magazine Jeune Afrique reported that the 4 men faced serious accusations of espionage, though the exact evidence remains classified. These arrests represented a direct confrontation that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Diplomatic ties withered as well. The French ambassador was recalled after the September 2022 coup and never replaced, leaving a significant gap in official communication channels. This diplomatic vacuum contributed to further misunderstandings and accusations between the two nations. The systematic dismantling of military agreements, expulsion of French forces, media restrictions, and public accusations of continued interference transformed what had once been a close, if uneven, relationship into open hostility. France's influence in Burkina Faso deteriorated from partnership to adversarial within the span of just 18 months. This historical context explains why the confrontation with Morell resonated so deeply with ordinary Burkinabe citizens. When they painted "We see you now" across walls throughout the country, they weren't just celebrating the exposure of a potential spy. They were expressing a collective sentiment that foreign powers could no longer operate in shadows. For many citizens, Traoré's public confrontation symbolized a new era where African nations would determine their own futures without accepting the continued quiet influence of former colonial powers. As French influence wanes in Burkina Faso, who's filling the power vacuum? The answer reveals a major shift in global influence across Africa. Russia stepped into the void left by France's departure, creating new alliances that extend beyond military cooperation to include economic partnerships and media influence. This growing relationship between Moscow and Ouagadougou represents part of a larger pattern spreading throughout the Sahel region. Burkina Faso faces serious security challenges that created an urgent need for new military support. Jihadist groups linked to al-Qaeda and Islamic State control significant portions of the country, particularly in the north and east. These groups carry out regular attacks against civilians and military targets alike. At one point, the government admitted it controlled only about 60% of national territory. The rest fell under terrorist influence or remained contested. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré took power in September 2022, he promised to reclaim this lost territory and improve security for ordinary citizens. With French forces withdrawn following Traoré's demand, the new government needed to find alternative security partnerships to combat the growing terrorist threat. The country lacked both equipment and training to fight experienced insurgent forces that had established control over border regions. This security vacuum created an opportunity for new international players to establish influence in a resource-rich West African nation. Russia emerged as an eager partner, offering military equipment and training without the colonial baggage associated with European powers. Unlike Western nations that often attach political conditions to military assistance, Russian support came with fewer strings regarding democratic reforms or human rights concerns. This approach proved attractive to Traoré's government, which faced international criticism following the coup. Military cooperation between the two nations grew rapidly throughout 2023, with Russian military advisors reportedly arriving in Ouagadougou to train Burkinabè forces. The Wagner Group, Russia's private military company, reportedly began operating in Burkina Faso, though official confirmation remains limited. This follows a pattern established in neighboring Mali, where Wagner mercenaries provided security services after French forces withdrew. In Burkina Faso, these forces focused particularly on protecting mining operations in areas threatened by terrorist activity. Gold mining represents a crucial economic sector for the country, and securing these resources became a priority for the government. Economic agreements with Russia expanded beyond security to include resource extraction, particularly in gold and other mineral-rich regions. The relationship culminated in October 2023 when Russia promised to build a nuclear power plant in Burkina Faso, a significant commitment that would transform the country's energy sector. This energy partnership demonstrated the extent to which cooperation had evolved beyond simple military assistance to include major infrastructure development. The media landscape shifted dramatically as well. Russian state media gained favorable access in Burkina Faso at the same time French outlets faced restrictions and suspensions. With organizations like France 24 and Radio France Internationale banned from broadcasting, Russian media filled information gaps with content that frequently highlighted Western failures and Russian successes in the region. This media presence helped shape public perception of international relationships and reinforced anti-Western sentiment. The shift toward Russia mirrors similar pivots in neighboring Mali and other Sahel nations, creating a regional trend away from Western influence. Mali expelled French forces in 2022 and developed close ties with Moscow. Niger's military government also moved toward Russian partnerships following their coup in 2023. These parallel developments suggest a coordinated regional realignment, rather than isolated decisions by individual countries. Russia now influences Burkina Faso's international position through a comprehensive approach that combines military support, economic partnerships, and political backing. This strategy encourages sovereign independence from traditional Western allies while creating new dependencies. Russian officials frequently visit the country, military equipment arrives from Moscow, and economic agreements strengthen bilateral ties. Most importantly, Russia supports Burkina Faso's rejection of Western influence without demanding political reforms that might threaten the current leadership. This growing Russian influence provides critical context for understanding why exposing an alleged French spy became such a powerful symbol of Burkina Faso's changing allegiances. When President Traoré confronted Julian Morell, he wasn't just addressing a single security breach, he was demonstrating the country's new geopolitical orientation. The public nature of the confrontation served both domestic and international audiences by showing that Burkina Faso had powerful new friends, willing to support its sovereignty claims. The incident fits perfectly into Russia's narrative about Western interference in African affairs. Russian officials and media quickly amplified the story of the captured French spy as evidence that former colonial powers continue attempting to control their previous territories through covert means. This narrative reinforces Russia's position as a defender of African sovereignty against Western imperialism, a message that resonates strongly with populations frustrated by decades of perceived exploitation. The confrontation between Traoré and Morell marks something much bigger than a single spy incident. It shows how African nations are changing their approach to foreign powers in the 21st century. When Traoré said, "We see you now," he captured a feeling spreading across the continent, a determination to spot and stop outside interference. This phrase now appears on walls throughout Burkina Faso and might soon spread to other African nations, taking similar stands against former colonial powers. The real question isn't about one French journalist or even France itself. It's whether Burkina Faso's new Russian partnerships will actually deliver the security and prosperity citizens want, or just replace one form of foreign influence with another.